Testing. 1 2 1 2. Testing. 1 2 1 2. Testing. Testing. Okay, we're gonna try a different coding software here. Let's see. What? Testing. Checking in. 1 2 1 2. Checking in. 1 2 1 2. Alright, well, looks like we're just going to have to get it through here. Hopefully this sounds good. We're going to have to try. Alright. Welcome everybody to Geezy Truth News. Thank you everybody for tuning in to GTN Network. It is June 19th, 2020. Well, here we are. As always, we gotta get things going here. You know, report on what's happening. Let's get everything going. What are the updates? Hopefully, we got some VIPs coming up here soon. You know, what do we got? I'm gonna have to look at all this stuff. So that's not bad. There you go. And then, what do we got? You know, do we have some interesting news or what? We still got some stuff going. Callers call in. We're trying a different encoding software, so we'll see how everything works out here. But you know what? Let's get the news on the road. Let's get the show on the road. Things are getting crazy, but you know what? We are here. We're keeping on going. So thank you, everybody. I mean, what? U.S. Saudis allies responsible for any environmental disaster off Yemen coast, Houthi. So, what are the main events here? China, Russia see U.S. bullying as IAEA adopts anti-Iran resolution. Let's see what we got here, folks.
The person you're trying to reach is currently unavailable. Please leave a message after the beep.
Looks like we're gonna have to try that one again. Okay, here we go.
Are we doing a video or no?
Yeah, let's do that. You ready? How are you?
Yeah.
All right. On 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, Jim, for coming on Geezy Truth News. As always, lay it on to us. And what's going on?
Well, there's quite a lot to report, actually, which include a host of efforts to take out Trump. To my astonishment, it turns out that we have discovered, by virtue of a lip reader, whose results we reported in the Real Deal reports on 15 June, that the Democrats attempted to assassinate President Trump at the State of the Union address, where Nancy Pelosi was going to deliver the poison with her handshake, and it would have resulted in a heart attack by the president about 2 hours later. But where what was widely observed but not understood at the time, the president did not shake her hand. And while that seemed to be a violation of protocol, it appears that, in fact, the reason was he knew what was coming, which is extremely significant, and of course means that there's a titanic war taking place here between the Democrats and the Republicans that far exceeds the boundaries of the norm, and where, in fact, it even appears now that the Democrats are so desperate, there's even a plot afoot to contaminate the rally he's going to hold in Tulsa tomorrow, just to illustrate how bad off are the Democrats. Joe Biden did a video presentation a couple of days ago, and he drew exactly 68 viewers, whereas Trump is holding a rally in Tulsa, and he had around a million requesting tickets. So the situation is simply stunning. What we have about this plot hatched in Salt Lake City, it includes that a whole host of fogger machines were brought in, where these fogger machines, 100 boxes of handheld spray mist fogger machines used for pest control were delivered to Salt Lake City, evidently to be used for this purpose, and where it appears that among those who are complicit are a fellow named John Huntsman, a former chair of the Atlantic Council, which is a subsidiary of the United Nations, who served 2 terms as governor of Utah. That it's also run by NATO, another subsidiary of the UN. That's not actually strictly correct. NATO is, of course, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but an adjunct, where Huntsman is linked to a prison swap of the convicted spy Paul Whelan to a Russian gun runner in Africa, domestic sniper networks, the Fast and Furious fiasco, where the Justice Department gave guns to Mexican drug cartels to kill people, and Mitt Romney, who has, of course, shown an antipathy for Donald Trump. After all, Romney ran for president with no success whatsoever, while Trump, coming out of nowhere, as it were, with no previous governmental experience, ran away with the nomination, defeating 17 other candidates and executing a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. So if Trump has, has no patience, does not take fools kindly, and Romney is an easy target, a pretty disgusting guy. The more you learn about him, the less you like him. Meanwhile, we have this book from John Bolton, which is an attempt to stab the president in the back. No one appears, however, to be taking it seriously, where there's, among the tweets about it, one from Dan Scavino, notable, there's nothing worse than a disgruntled, arrogant, egotistical, and all-around miserable warmonger who gets fired from their job, goes on to write a book with classified information while being paid millions of dollars for it. Someone changed their tune once they were fired, and where even the public is in general agreement that Joe Biden is not equipped mentally or physically to assume the presidency. Two new polls show the majority of voters do not believe former Vice President Joe Biden has enough mental strength to handle the commander-in-chief's responsibility. American Greatness partnered with TIPP to survey Michiganders and Floridians about their views on Biden and President Trump's mental fitness. Nearly three-quarters, 71% of Michiganders who were polled said they did not believe Biden has the mental sharpness he needs to be president. 6 in 10 Floridians agreed, where Zogby had conducted a nationwide poll of likely voters, found that 55% believe it's more likely than not that Biden is in the early stages of dementia. 45% believe less likely, but I think the evidence is simply overwhelming that Biden is completely lost it. He's had several brain aneurysms. He appears to suffer from brain damage, and he's cognitively incompetent. He can't even perform for 5 minutes with a teleprompter without committing major gaffes. Meanwhile, the nation seems to be undergoing, with these Antifa and Black Lives Matter mobs, as an incentive to remove statue after statue after statue. This, frankly, is an attempt to eradicate the history of the United States by removing all the symbols. You even have the Democratic mayor of Columbus, Ohio, removing the statue of Christopher Columbus, for whom the city is named. I mean, how idiotic is that? We have similar events in St. Louis, forcing Tower Grove Park to remove a Columbus statue because he was a war criminal, raped, tortured, and murdered, which doesn't even appear to be historically accurate. Patriots are starting to defend statues against these lunatic left-wing mobs, as Natural News has reported, where they turned out in Brandenburg, Kentucky, to defend a statue they heard was going to be defaced by a Black Lives Matter mob. It was a 70-foot statue moved to the side from the University of Louisville campus in 2016 that was erected in memory of Confederate veterans who were killed in the Civil War. When the protesters showed up bearing Black Lives Matter signs, those protecting the statue responded, "All lives matter. Go home." Some business owners neighbors in the area boarded up their windows in case violence broke out, but law enforcement was on hand to keep matters under control. The statue's defenders got their message across loud and clear, and although harsh words were exchanged, the site remained peaceful overall. But it's a very, very disturbing pattern where statues across the country are coming under attack. The rioters don't seem to care who they hurt in the process of tearing them down. One left-wing protester was actually critically injured after being struck in the head with a piece of a Confederate statue in Portsmouth, Virginia. As the mob tore pieces off the monument, he was left convulsing and bleeding on the ground with parts of his skull showing. Yesterday, California legislators announced the statue of Christopher Columbus and Queen Isabella will be taken out of the Capitol Rotunda, where it stood since 1883. In a statement, lawmakers said Christopher Columbus is a deeply polarizing historical figure, given the deadly impact his arrival in the hemisphere had on indigenous populations. This is so bizarre, it's almost beyond words. I mean, we have a lot of statues to a lot of historical incidents, and every one could be qualified in some shape, manner, or form, where it appears now the rioters are even going after statues of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, which means no one is sacrosanct. No doubt they'll go toward Abraham Lincoln subsequently. Corporate America has played a role here, it turns out, in appeasing, subsidizing a lot of these efforts. Very, very unfortunate. The latest include Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, and Mrs. Butterworth feeling the heat. I use Aunt Jemima syrup, or occasionally Mrs. Butterworth myself. And my colleague, Mike Barra, on Real Deal Reports today, when we were discussing this, explained that the woman who founded Aunt Jemima actually was a black woman who rose from poor roots to become a millionaire, showing, of course, that blacks actually can succeed. Uncle Ben's converted rice, my goodness. The Butterworth's pancake syrup said the company had begun a complete brand and package review, where critics have associated the shape of Mrs. Butterworth's bottle with the mammy, a caricature of black women as subservient to whites. Later, the parent company of Cream of Wheat announced it's conducting a similar review of the chef character who's appeared on its packaging. Some of this we could consider to be appropriate, but most of it seems to me to verge on a bit of silliness. Meanwhile, we have Charles Barkley very appropriately observing that defunding the police will hurt the black community. I've always been a fan of Sir Charles. Here's what he had to say. Defunding police departments around the country would have a negative effect on black people, disproportionately affecting all communities of color. Instead, he suggests the better approach would be to weed out the bad cops. On Monday, Sir Charles appeared on an ESPN morning show called Get Up, saying we just need police reform because we need police. We need to weed out the bad cops. You know, I hear these guys getting on television, these politicians talking about defunding the police department, but that would have a negative effect on the black communities. Who are the black people going to call? Ghostbusters? Because they're not going to defund the police in the good white neighborhoods, so we need police reform. And it's very interesting that Sir Charles should be such a clear voice of sanity amidst so much of the lunatic nonsense being spouted. An interesting development has occurred in Brazil, where Brazilian MPs went to a hospital that was supposed to have 5,000 infected individuals and 200 deaths, and found the hospital was not even completed its structure, and it was entirely empty, still under construction, had no deaths. This is part and parcel of the immense scam we found taking place all over the world. I reported some time back how a German journalist had gone to a hospital teeming with coronavirus patients and found nobody was there. How hundreds of Americans have gone to hospitals all over the United States and once again found nobody there. How a Minnesota Republican state senator, Scott Jensen, who's also a doctor, explained that the American Medical Association was encouraging doctors to overcount coronavirus deaths, that he was asked to assign that death as cause to a patient who'd never even been tested, that Medicare is determining that if you have a COVID-19 admission, you get $13,000. If the COVID-19 patient goes on a ventilator, you get $39,000. So they're subsidizing a massive overcount. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. If you want to get a lengthy, a very detailed report on coronavirus, I have a new show called The Conspiracy Guy, which is a website, jimtheconspiracyguy.com. I've done 4 shows so far. The first on the 24th of May, the coronavirus phenomenon, medical emergency or political pandemic. The second on the 31st of May, the moon landing hoax, how we know we didn't go. The third on the 7th of June, the New Zealand shootings, were they real or a political stunt? And the most recent, last Sunday, 14 June 2020, the Second Amendment and the politics of gun control. Now, they're all archived there at jimtheconspiracyguy.com. And I highly recommend, if you have any interest in any of these issues, you'll probably find there the most thorough, comprehensive, and detailed discussions of each of those 4 events or circumstances or situations that you've ever encountered. I can't recommend them highly enough, where I'm going to be doing yet another this coming Sunday, where the show is broadcast from 8 to 10 Central Time, 9 to 11 Eastern, that's 6 to 8 Pacific, on how to spot a false flag, where I go through a dozen or 15 of these cases to give you examples as to how to be able to sort out what's going on. Meanwhile, we have 2 new medical reports for you. The first is a study of the long-term negative effects of face coverings on our ventilatory function, in other words, on our cardiovascular function, on, breathing in and oxygenating our blood. This was done on Saudi Arabian women, 38 young, healthy, non-smoking, non-obese women. 18 wore face coverings for 4 or more hours today. The rest did not. In many references, the doctors compared the effects with those of face masks. It turned out that a free and unobstructed airflow in the upper and lower respiratory tract during inspiration and expiration are prerequisites for normal respiratory function. Any pathological or non-pathological condition that can compromise free airflow during respiratory cycles can result in hyperventilation with increased respiratory effort that can lead to physiological burdens involving cardiovascular effects and the temperature system, as well as psychological distress. A large body of knowledge exists about possible mechanisms and short and long-term physiological responses for different pathological airflow limiting conditions involving the respiratory system endogenously, such as obstructive sleep apnea, from which I myself happen to suffer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and asthma. Studies on physiological responses to external airflow limiting factors such as surgical and protective masks, however, are relatively few. Use of face masks of different air permeability can cause changes in temperature and humidity in the microclimates of the face mask, causing different effects on heart rate, thermostress, and perception of discomfort. It's also shown 1 to 4 hours use of surgical masks during surgeries alone can result in decreased arterial oxygen saturation levels and increased pulse rate in surgeons. So that's very significant. I've been observing in the past what ought to be obvious, that since you're recycling your oxygen depleted air, you're rebreathing air that has limited capacity to reoxygenize your red blood cells and thereby your body and your brain cells, which are unquestionably leading to killing brain cells, where I estimate that by the end of this pandemic episode, where we're following strictures that are dictated by government policies, often by the states, but which it turns out are not scientifically validated by a new study conducted in Switzerland, which I'm about to report, that we're going to see an average drop of about 5 IQ points across the U.S. population. Meanwhile, Democratic governors such as Newsom in California are dictating the Californians must wear face masks in public. I mean, this is just bizarre beyond belief, because it's not scientifically warranted. In fact, let me give you here now what I have just published before coming on the show, just published on my blog at jamesfetzer.org. Swiss research report. Facts about COVID-19. This appears to me to be the most comprehensive study we have available. And I'm going to read a couple of dozen of the research findings. According to the latest immunological and serological studies, the overall lethality of COVID-19 is about 0.1%, and thus in the range of a strong seasonal flu. In countries like the US, the UK, and also Sweden, without a lockdown, overall mortality since the beginning of the year is in the range of a strong influenza season. In countries like Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, overall mortality is in the range of a mild influenza season. Even in global hotspots, the risk of death for the general population of school and working age is typically in the range of a daily car ride to work. The risk was initially overestimated because many people with only mild or no symptoms were not taken into account. Up to 80% of all test positive persons remain symptom-free. In other words, even if you test positive, that doesn't mean you actually have the active disease. Even among 70 to 79-year-olds, about 60% remain symptom-free. Over 95% of all persons develop at most moderate symptoms. Up to 60% of all persons may already have a certain cellular background immunity to COVID-19 due to contact with previous coronaviruses, such as those for the common cold. The median or average age of the deceased in most countries, including Italy, is over 80 years, and only about 4% of the deceased had no serious preconditions. The age and risk profiles of deaths thus essentially corresponds to normal mortality. Normal mortality. In many countries, up to 2/3 of all the extra deaths occurred in nursing homes, which do not benefit from a general lockdown. Moreover, in many cases, it's not clear whether these people really died from COVID-19 or from weeks of extreme stress and isolation. Up to 30% of all additional deaths may have been caused not by COVID-19, but by the effects of the lockdown, panic, and fear. For example, the treatment of heart attacks and strokes decreased by up to 60% because many patients no longer dare to go to hospitals out of fear of being contaminated. Even in so-called COVID-19 deaths, it is often not clear whether they died from or with coronavirus. that is from underlying diseases, or if they were counted as presumed cases and not tested at all. However, official figures usually do not reflect this distinction. In other words, as Dr. Jensen was reporting, if you died and happened to have COVID-19, you were said to have died from COVID-19, and that was the case, even if you were actually the victim of a murder or a suicide. Many media reports of young and healthy people dying from COVID-19 turn out to be false. Many of these young people either did not die from COVID-19, they had been seriously ill, for example, from undiagnosed leukemia, or they were in fact 109 instead of 9 years old. The claimed increase in Kawasaki disease in children also turned out to be false. Strong increase in regional mortality can occur if there is a collapse in the care of the elderly and sick as a result of infection or panic, or if there are additional risk factors such as severe air pollution. Questionable regulations for dealing with the disease sometimes led to additional bottlenecks in funeral or cremation services. In countries such as Italy and Spain, and to some extent the UK and the US, hospital overloads due to strong flu waves are not unusual. Moreover, this year, up to 15% of healthcare workers were put into quarantine, even if they developed no symptoms. The often shown exponential curves of corona cases are misleading, as the number of tests also increased exponentially. In most countries, the ratio of positive tests to tests overall, that is, the positive rate, remained constant at 5 to 25%, or increased only slightly. In many countries, the peak of the spread was already reached well before the lockdown. Countries without curfews and contact bans, such as Japan, South Korea, Belarus, or Sweden, have not experienced a more negative course of events than other countries. Sweden was even praised by the World Health Organization and now benefits from higher immunity compared to lockdown countries. The fear of a shortage of ventilators was unjustified. According to lung specialists, the invasive ventilation incubation of COVID-19 patients, which is partly done out of fear of spreading the virus, is in fact often counterproductive and damaging to the lungs. Contrary to the original assumptions, various studies have shown that there is no evidence of the virus spreading through aerosols, tiny particles floating in the air, or through smear infections, say on door handles or smartphones. The main modes of transmission are direct contact and droplets produced when coughing or sneezing. There is also no scientific evidence for the effectiveness of face masks in healthy or asymptomatic individuals. On the contrary, experts warn that such masks interfere with normal breathing and may become germ carriers. Leading doctors call them a media hype and ridiculous. Many clinics in Europe and the U.S. remain strongly underutilized or almost empty during the COVID-19 peak, and in some cases had to send staff home. Millions of surgeries and therapies were canceled, including many cancer screenings and organ transplants. Several media were caught trying to dramatize the situation in hospitals, sometimes even with manipulative images and videos. In particular, the unprofessional reporting of many media maximized fears and panic in the population. The virus test gets used internationally are prone to errors and can produce false positive and false negative results. Moreover, the official virus test was not clinically validated due to time pressure and may sometimes react positive to other coronaviruses. Numerous international renowned experts in the fields of virology, immunology, and epidemiology consider the measures taken to be counterproductive and recommend rapid natural immunization of the general population and protection of risk groups. That means just getting out and interacting, getting outside, getting fresh air, exposure to the air, and interacting with other people, which tends to keep our immune systems robust. Failure to do those things, such as through the lockdown, social distancing, and mask wearing, however, have the opposite effects and actually weaken our immune system. At no time was there a medical reason for the closure of schools, as the risk of disease and transmission in children is extremely low. There is also no medical reason for small classes, mask, or social distancing rules in schools. The claim that only severe COVID-19 but not influenza may cause various thrombosis and pulmonary lung embolism is not true, as has been known for 50 years. That severe influenza greatly increases the risk of thrombosis and embolism too. Several medical experts expressed coronavirus vaccines as unnecessary or even dangerous. Indeed, the vaccine against the so-called swine flu of 2009, for example, led to sometimes severe neurological damage and lawsuits in the millions. In the testing of new coronavirus vaccines, too, serious complications and failures have already occurred. A global influenza or corona pandemic can indeed extend over several seasons, but many studies of a second wave are based on very unrealistic assumptions, such as a constant risk of illness and death across all age groups. Several nurses, for example, in New York City, described an oftentimes fatal medical mismanagement of COVID patients due to questionable financial incentives or inappropriate medical protocols. The number of persons suffering from unemployment, depression, and domestic violence as a result of the measures has reached historic record values. Several experts predict that the measure will claim far more lives than the virus itself. In other words, the steps we've taken to prevent are going to cost more lives than would have died had we done nothing of the kind. According to the UN, 1.6 billion people around the world are at immediate risk of losing their livelihood. NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden warned that the coronavirus will be used for the permanent expansion of global surveillance. Renowned virologist Pablo Goldschmidt spoke of a global media terror and totalitarian measures. Leading British virologist Professor John Oxford spoke of a media pandemic. More than 600 scientists have warned of an unprecedented surveillance of society through problematic apps for contact tracing. In some countries, such contact tracing is already carried out directly by the Secret Service. In several parts of the world, the population is already being monitored by drones and facing serious police overreach. A 2019 World Health Organization study on public health measures against pandemic influenza found that, from a medical perspective, contact tracing is not recommended in any circumstances. Nevertheless, contact tracing apps have already become partially mandatory in several countries. Let me just observe, by way of closing, that the attempts to take out Trump have been many and varied, beginning with Plan A, Russiagate, which fell flat. Plan B, Ukrainegate, where Joe Biden committed a quid pro quo, but Trump had not. Plan C, impeachment. Plan D, coronavirus, the effects of which are going to endure for years to come. Plan E, Black Lives Matter, rioting and looting. Plan F, the State of the Union attempted assassination attempt I mentioned, where I highly recommend you track down Real Deal reports for 15 June so you can actually watch the video and the interpretation by the lip reader, and I welcome additional research and corroboration. There's a Plan G, a Chinagate, that is yet to be fully manifest, and a Plan H for the summer solstice on the 21st, which is right around the corner, where there are worrisome anticipations of some kind of bloodbath taking place that will be in the satanic tradition associated with that event. There is more that could be reported here, but I perhaps have given you enough, and I would like to believe that the reports from the Swiss Research Council about the coronavirus pandemic bring enough heartening news to sustain us over Father's Day, which of course will occur on Sunday. Meanwhile, I'm very appreciative of having these opportunities to share research findings with you once again here on your broadcast, which I'm glad to do.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's incredible. What do you think? I don't know if you mentioned the Chaz encampments and similar. What do you think about those?
Well, they're ridiculous in the extreme. They tried to pull a similar event in Portland, but in front of the mayor's office, and he had it cleaned out forthwith. Chaz is now making absurd demands that some 22 illegal aliens should be turned into citizens, as though this tiny enclave of miscreants and misfits should be dictating national policy for the United States of America. I'm just terribly disturbed that the Democratic Party has been encouraging this kind of nonsense. It's not going to work in their favor come November. I believe that the combination of all these factors are going to succeed and totally discredit the Democratic Party, which, in my view, is doing a better job of self-immolation than a Buddhist monk protesting the Vietnam War. So it's not going to play out well. They don't even have a candidate. Joe Biden is obviously incompetent. Who knows what they're going to try next? But we all have to be in a state of concern because there are very many very high-ranking political figures in the Democratic Party who are going to be taken down in the process of draining the swamp, where I'd remind everyone that after a certain town hall meeting where Hillary was not given one of the questions in advance, she became furious and told Donna Brazil that if he gets elected, we're all going to hang. They are all desperate to save themselves, and they're willing to sacrifice the nation, as is well illustrated by the fact that one Democrat governor after another is dragging out the lockdown totally unnecessarily. And while you hear commentators from the left insisting that Donald Trump is a selfish person who puts his own interests ahead of those of the nation, that was conclusively refuted when he shut down the economy based upon the model coming from Imperial College by Neil Ferguson that projected 2.2 million Americans would die and 500,000 Brits if their economies were not shut down, in spite of knowing that the robust economy and the surging stock market were his two greatest assets heading into re-election. Nevertheless, he shut them down to protect the country. The Democrats, however, are willing to keep the country shut down in a misguided attempt to regain power, where they have no interest in the best interests of the American people. And frankly, the American people are perceiving the score, which is why when Joe Biden gives a video, he gets 68 viewers. When Donald Trump throws a rally, he gets 1 billion asking for tickets. I believe it's a foregone conclusion that Donald Trump will go to a landslide victory in November, but the Democrats are going to continue to pull out all the stops, throw in the kitchen sink, and do everything they possibly can to forestall it. Without success, I predict, but it won't be for lack of trying.
Right. Very fascinating. And then for the last question, if you have time, there's a viewer was asking if he's trying to figure out if there's any studies or reasons let's see, that hydrochloroquine would help with non-ionizing radiation sickness.
Oh, now, I don't actually know the answer to that, but it is very clear that hydroxychloroquine is a miracle drug when it comes to the coronavirus, and this is one more way in which I fault Anthony Tony the Rat Fauci. No one should take him seriously. The guy is simply the consigliere of the medical mafia headed by Don Bill Gates that has among its prominent members Ted Turner, who's advocated a 95% reduction in the world's population. Bill Gates Sr., who is a founder of Planned Parenthood, I actually endorse it, but apparently the motives they had were improper to reduce black population in America. David Rockefeller, and of course the diabolical presence of Henry Kissinger, one of the most evil figures ever on face of earth. I'm sorry to say the battle is not yet won, but I do believe that the president is largely aware of the factors allied against him and that he is taking measures to cope with them that will ultimately benefit the country and bring us through this dire mess.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Jim. Any last things, or I think that's about it for now, huh?
Just encourage you to go to my blog at jamesfetzer.org for that wonderful this is the most comprehensive now study of coronavirus on my blog at jamesfetzer.org. And remember, if you're interested, check out my Conspiracy Guy show at jimtheconspiracyguy.com, where you can find those 4 presentations I've already made with yet another coming this Sunday. Check it out.
That's fantastic. We're all looking forward to your next show. Thank you, Jim.
My pleasure.
Take care. All right. Well, looks like that concludes today's show. What can we do, Everything keeps on rolling, and that is the end. So thank you very much, everybody. Till next time, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And keep on being great patriots and keep on doing what you got to do. So God bless. Thank you very much. Take care.